Okay, welcome to our fourth session, Listening to Cyborgs. Today we have Layla and Daniel Villegas walking us through the politics of timbre. When we first started sort of talking about how this session would work, Layla and Daniel didn't necessarily, follow the same sort of track of what they were going to talk about. But 2 beers later, all of a sudden everything was making sense. Their projects were speaking so brilliantly together. Layla is an ethnomusicologist. She's also in Africana studies. She works on Afrofuturism, that's generically large term what's up. Daniel is a 5th-year musicologist. He works sort of in the line of music, aesthetics, and philosophy generally. And today they're going to sort of talk us through sort of different aspects of timbre, different aspects of technology and synthesizing voice, to sort of think through different sort of notions of surveillance society, war, breaking down some identity politics. I think it's going to be very exciting. We're going to start with Layla. Welcome, Layla.
So, I totally forgot about the timbre thing, but everything else. So I'm not going to talk as much about timbre. So as Maria said, I'm also in Africana Studies department, and so I have a lot of methodologies going on and a lot of different things going on in my head. So this is kind of like a welcome to my head thing. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about Black women and Black women in mainstream music and how they navigate kind of machine and machine-like identities, whether we want to call it the cyborg, whether we want to call it an android, or whether we want to call it something that is human-like with also robot-like qualities. All sorts of different definitions of what it means to be machine and machine-like. But of course I've had the cyborg up there because we are listening to cyborgs, and most of the people that I talk about identify with a cyborg identity and subjectivity, although some of them kind of have some ambiguous definitions of what it means to be cyborg, and so we'll talk about that. How it might be problematic, but it also might work. So let's first start with what is Black sci-fi. So in order to talk about what Black sci-fi is, we have to talk about what Afrofuturism is, of course. So some of you may not have heard the term Afrofuturism, or may have heard it but don't know what it means. So Afrofuturism, according to cultural critic Mark Derry, is an aesthetic that treats African American themes and addresses African American concerns in the context of 20th century technoculture, and more generally African American signification that appropriates images of technology and a prosthetically enhanced future. And so I actually use the term Black sci-fi because there are some qualms that I have with Afrofuturism that we'll, of course, get into as I continue to talk. But let's talk about what Afrofuturism does do and kind of the definition that it's taken on more recently. So, of course, this is 94. This is over 20 years ago. So nowadays, it's generally, the general kind of rule of thumb definition for Afrofuturism is basically an aesthetic that creates kind of parallels between the tropes of sci-fi, of fantasy, and of supernatural narratives, and those of African American and Afro-diasporic actuality. So it's not just, African and Afro-diasporic actuality. So it's not just African Americans who are being paralleled to these themes. It's also the continent of Africa, and it's also the Caribbean, it's also Europe, it's also South America. So that's some of the altered definitions that have gone on in the last 22 years. And so there are different ways that this aesthetic kind of functions. So let's just talk about that quickly. So there's metaphoric commentary, and of course there's escapism. So the different types of commentary, of course there's commentary of generally like a xenophobic mistreatment of Black people globally. And also commentary of the use of technology by Black people globally, but also kind of an escapism. So the narrative is used as an escapist kind of metaphor course, you have, the commentary of xenophobic treatment. So the more and more atrocities that get committed against, somebody due to their biological idiosyncrasies, i.e. their black skin, that they obviously can't change because it's biological, the more and more they're going to feel their alienness, right? And so that's one way of kind of paralleling the sci-fi experience or the alien experience in sci-fi narratives to the black experience. Whether we want to call it generally double consciousness or more specifically call it institutional racism or what have you, all of these definitions are valid, right, for metaphoric commentary in terms of xenophobia. And then there's also commentary of the use of technology, so saying that black people have used technology for just as long as any other kind of ancient civilization of people or any other community of people, right? So to establish black people as a community of promulgators of technology in very specific ways. We can talk about the far past, so we can talk about ancient Kemet. We can talk about the near past, so back in anywhere from the 30s to the 70s, kind of the use and the innovations in vocoder technology, and talkbox technology. So these are all music things as well as telecommunication things as well, right? Well, not the talkbox, but the vocoder. We can talk about technological insurgency, which I'll talk about later, and looping samples. So the fact that SPs, loop pedals, chord synthesizers, and vocoders, chord samplers are all historically kind of necessary devices for hip hop, which is very staple in African American music, right, or in global black music as well. So that kind of thing, and also the present use of auto-tune in every kind of music, but also becoming very staple more and more in hip-hop and R&B. And of course the use of DAWs, which is very necessary to hip-hop, right? And then of course, as escapism, so as a way to envision what a future might look like in a utopian way, whether it's, a mothership. So whenever you hear the word mothership in a song, often it is used as kind of a doublet to signify Africa, right? So to signify this Africa that is alien, that we don't know, whether we don't know it temporally or we don't know it geographically. So geographically, we may not know it because we have never been there. Temporally, we may not know it even as an African because even if we live there geographically, temporally, colonialism, not colonialism in the history of colonialism. Colonialism disrupts, that kind of, that geographic lineage. So so even if we are geographically in Africa, we don't know those ancestors and we don't know that culture, that ancestral culture to be the culture that we experience now because of this disruption, obviously, right? And of course, in the New World, we don't know it because of temporality and geography. So yeah, and of course in fantasy, outside of sci-fi and fantasy, it's a way to just envision what a future might look like in a very utopianist way. Whether it means, just flying in the sky with all these colors and geometric shapes around you, whatever it is, it's also very much a part of kind of this Afrofuturist aesthetic. So why I prefer to use the term black sci-fi, I don't know if I put a slide for this. Nope, I'll do that yet. Okay, I haven't put a slide for it, but the reason, or some of the reasons that I prefer to use the term sci-fi, I mean, so in the real world, there's no real difference, right? So sci-fi and black sci-fi and Afrofuturism are kind of always on par with each other, always defined as sort of the same sort of things. But one of my first kind of real qualms with Afrofuturism is just the nebulousness of it. It's just so fucking nebulous, and it's like it's very I'm sure it's an annoyance to many artists. So almost every artist that I interview, so the ones that have been a part of this kind of Afrofuturist canon or have been placed in this Afrofuturist canon for a long time, completely disavow Afrofuturism. I am not an Afrofuturist. I am just an artist. I am the black avant-garde. I am this. I am that. I am not Afrofuturist, right? And then some of them that are just getting into it are like, yeah, Afrofuturism, woo! And so, you know, they get into it as, you know, this sort of fad and this sort of, you know, fashion statement or what have you. But it becomes everything and nothing at the same time. So that's obviously one of the qualms. And just like any fad, you know, that'll be it. But some of the dangers of that is the fact that it kind of re-ostracizes the people that kind of created or became the promulgators of this aesthetic in order to not be ostracized by it. So, or to not be ostracized by like mainstream Black culture, or to not be ostracized by the box that Black culture is put in. So, for example, if you are, you know, maybe a steampunk nerd and happen to be Black at the same time, that is a very subaltern status. That is a very, you know, kind of triple consciousness, you know, status, right? It's something that you are experiencing from a lot of exclusionary angles. So you're experiencing this exclusion socially, and you have to kind of put yourself in some sort of, or you're making an aesthetic for yourself to say that, you know, I belong here and there are other Black people who belong here too. So it's very similar to the Afropunk aesthetic where, you know, it was created for Black punks who felt very ostracized by both the white punk world and the Black music world that didn't recognize punk as Black music at all. But then when it becomes fad, obviously it becomes something that re-ostracizes those very people who wanted to be a part of this aesthetic that actually accepted them. And they are no longer accepted by this aesthetic that just becomes a fashion statement. So once Afrofuturism becomes a fashion statement, Black steampunks, Black cyberpunks, or anybody who is Black and uses this as kind of their political commentary for life is ostracized, right? Because it is no longer your political agenda, it is a fashion statement. So that's kind of my qualm with the nebulousness of Afrofuturism. And so that's one of them. Another reason that I prefer the term Black sci-fi is because it's a way to talk about the future of, not only the future of Black people, but the past of Black people, right? So we're talking about maybe ancient Kemet, or maybe anything that talks about ancient civilizations as always having these tools and technologies of science. So we're not just talking about something that is in the future and something that is utopian, a utopian vision that can't really be reached right away because of the temporal space you're in, but we're talking about something that has always been there and we can always reach back to, you know, access again. It's also a way to talk about the ways that Black people have informed science or perhaps even defied science on Black terms. So, of course, we talk about sci-fi and the difference between sci-fi and fantasy, as sci-fi being something that is kind of accessible to us, whereas fantasy is not. It's just fantasy, right? Whereas science fiction, it's fiction based on science that is already possible. So the possibilities of science that are, you know, here or around us, or things that we could possibly innovate out of two other sort of inventions or innovations, can come together and create a possibility. And that's what science fiction is. It's something that is imagined because, you know, we already have the science to do it. So it is a very real possibility. And so that's, for me, that kind of takes shape as different types of sciences. So we have natural science, we have technological science, but we also have spiritual science. And as we know, the history of Black people and spirituality has not always been a very I don't know how to put it, like a constant history, or something that it's experienced a lot of disruption, just like a lot of other things. And so it's something that we have to recognize as something that should not be shunned or ignored. And it also kind of helps us to realize that science fiction is something that is not necessarily, maybe it's not something that's been rationally proven yet, but it's, but spiritual science has also operated under, you know, these postulates of non-rationality. But it doesn't necessarily make spiritual science irrational, right? So the fact that there are people who believe in spiritual science doesn't make it something that's irrational and not possible. And therefore we have to talk about spiritual science on the same kind of level that we talk about natural science and technological science and so forth. And so that's why I feel like fantasy is not necessarily something that, yes and no, something that describes, the Black experience, or that can parallel the Black experience like Black sci-fi can, or the tropes of Black sci-fi can. So that's why I feel like Afrofuturism, because of its nebulousness again, and because of that realm of fantasy, that kind of makes spiritual science sound like something irrational instead of non-rational. It just doesn't necessarily work for me, right? And work for a lot of the artists that I'm talking about. Okay, so let's just skip some of the other stuff because I'm gonna run out of time. But there are, we can talk about it during the question and answer session, I guess, about what my other qualms with Afrofuturism are. So of course, why the machine or machine-like alter ego, and why might the cyborg and the Black, or what might the cyborg and the Black woman have in common? And so what I love about Maria inviting me to anything to talk about is that she always gets me to think about things that I haven't thought about before. So I think the first time that I spoke was at like a hip-hop and Afrofuturism dinner for the undergrads, right? And we were talking about, escapism, and I was talking about a lot of dystopic things, and she was just like, well, so is dystopianism just as essential to Afrofuturism as utopianism? And I'm just like, yeah. Why didn't I think of that before? I need to, look into this, and not a lot of people talk about dystopianism. So I'll talk about it today, and I'll also talk about the fact that I didn't think about the alter ego or about these cyborgs as something, now that I'm so, enveloped in this world of dystopianism, as cyborgs is something that could be just as utopianist as they are, dystopic. And so yeah, let's talk about that. So there are so many reasons that the cyborg, could take on this subjectivity of the Black woman or a Black person in general. Right, so you have something that is alien, something that is not quite human, but human-like. Traditionally cyborgs, the difference between cyborgs and androids, of course, is that cyborgs are thought to be half, biologic, or half organic and half, scientifically engineered entities or species or specimens or whatever. And androids are thought to not be that, or thought to be robot, but with human-like qualities. So perhaps, human-like flesh, but not quite flesh. Obviously bipedal and so on and so forth. But we can think of something that is, machine or machine-like, like the cyborg, as alien, obviously. So something that is not, not quite human, but human-like. Traditionally, the cyborg is, okay, yeah, I said that already. But right, so this is, so we can think of this as, this identity that Janelle Monáe takes on, which is Cindy Mayweather. We can think of this as the identity that the Satisfaction takes on. So they don't quite take on the name of an alter ego, but they take on this identity of two cyborgs coming as aliens, coming from another planet and coming into Earth and seeing things objectively, which is where the objective observer comes in. So you are somebody who does not know any of these qualms of Earth. You don't know, what the antics of society and capitalism and, modern industry and, big industry are, but you can see things, through fresh eyes, right? So this is kind of the objective observer kind of lens that the cyborg might take on. You have somebody who can also desire. So not only do you have, this robot identity, but you also have a human identity. You have a heart, you have a soul, and you are able to desire and love and feel things and lust for things, right? Which a lot of my people talk about. And then you are also exemplary of human technology. So all of the atrocities that you're experiencing as a Black person, as a Black woman, you are exemplary of something that is beyond those atrocities or beyond those things that designate you other, right? So, for example, your skin is melanin, and melanin is a technology. So melanin is the idea that, or is a device, is thought of as a device, obviously in Afrofuturist narratives, to protect people from harmful UV rays, but at the same time absorb vitamin D. So it's totally a device. It's not just something, that's biologically engineered for everyone, but it's a device for a very specific group of people. You can think of the third eye as a technology, so spirit as technology. So there's an awesome Haitian electronica producer as well as percussionist named Val Gentil, but her name is also Val Inc. That's her stage name. And she was at a conference a couple of years ago, and one thing that I love that she said was that she, as a Haitian person, believes that, Haitian people are technologies because they are wires between the natural world and the spirit world. So they are able to channel the spirits through their bodies and through their third eyes, and bring it to the natural world. So again, this is spirit technology or spiritual science. This is something that is not irrational because it's happened before, or people have seen it happen before, and people have experienced it. People have ways of explaining it, but it's not something that you can explain through traditional senses of rationality, right? And also human toil is technology. So you can think of, so there's a great short film on YouTube called Pumzi by a Kenyan artist named Wanudi Kayu. And she's a feminist I don't know if she'd call herself an Afrofuturist filmmaker, but she's definitely explored sci-fi a few times. And this is one of a great example of her exploring sci-fi. She explores this character named Asha, who is kind of trapped in this internment camp in Kenya, I think about 20 years into the future, and has to kind of work in order to create sustainability for the camp. So everybody in the camp has to urinate in order to create clean water for the camp. So they have to urinate and turn their urine into clean water. They have to sweat and turn their sweat into the oil that keeps machines going in the camp, or that keeps the lights on, keeps the energy going in the camp. And they have to bleed in order to do the same. They have to spit in order to do the same. So every kind of liquid that comes out of their body is used as a technology to keep the energy in the camp going. And so this is a way that this cyborg identity really identifies what people kind of fear for the future at the same time, which kind of brings us to the fact that cyborg identity isn't always utopianist, but it's it takes on a very dystopic picture of what the future might be. And so this is kind of what I fear about Afrofuturism, is that, or a lot of what I fear about it, not everything, but a lot of people take on this utopianist vision of what Black people might experience in the future in order to get us out of, this world that has been hell for us. But a lot of people also see it, as they should, in a very sci-fi tradition, right? As something, or envision futures that are not quite, utopianist, but in fact the opposite, and see the cyborg as kind of this, or use the cyborg as an identity to exemplify what it means to suffer and what it might mean to suffer in the future. Not so to suffer right now as a human being, and then in the future, even if you are half machine, half human, whatever powers you might have that you don't have as a human being, you still might suffer because you're Black, right? And because you're alien, and because there's all this xenophobic mistreatment that you might suffer from. And so let's take a look at some of the people that I'm talking about when I talk about the alien and objective observer. Somebody who's really exemplary of that is this duo called Dissatisfaction. So Dissatisfaction is an awesome group who released this album called Earthy in 2015. In fact, yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the album. And so they have, I think you guys heard the song Universal Perspective. I don't think you guys heard the song Land yet. But the entire album is them coming to Earth as aliens, as I said, and kind of looking at it through very objective eyes and seeing everything for what it is. So they have a song about cultural appropriation, especially of Black music. They have a song about the planet being sold to obviously capitalism and all these, so a planet being sold to itself. So the people that own the planet are the people that also own the means of the tools of production and everything. And then you have Universal Perspective, which like a lot of songs on the album is very essentialist and existentialist. And just kind of putting into perspective everything that they view the human condition to be about on Earth. And so I'll play a little bit of each. And so this song is called Landlands, which is a little bit of it. This is their observations about cultural appropriation, gentrification.
Leave a lame duck flying in his fake fame, relying on and replying to his fake names, pandering and meandering Neanderthals, going home crying more than Niagara Falls. Aim is off, came soft, hate the bass soft. We hate getting all way raw, take a face off. They hemming high at my hems and my shake off. They shame it all, take it all, ripped and made off. They take jazz, take soul, take hip hop, and lay the nigga every inch and every drip drop. They money making Harlem shaking to the dish posh. They tryna fuck it till they come, hope they get off. Research your mom's dictionary. I'm this sorry, if it was in your heart, you wouldn't have to work hard. Your shit is trash garbage, my work's gone. Fucking apple strudel doodle, I'm a work of art.
So then we also have the cyborg as kind of this desiring person or identity. So someone who kind of has, you know, the power to love, but also the ability to feel any sort of kind of human emotions, compassion, sensitivities and vulnerabilities, and things that often, you know, Black identity was kind of, and still is in a lot of ways, kind of shunned from feeling or expressing, whether it's the desire to just, you know, be desired. You know, a lot of times our, you know, ways of dancing as a Black person, ways of expressing yourself sartorially as a Black person, ways of just, you know, lusting over other people is shunned a lot because it's thought of as something that is aggressive, is hypersexual, and so on and so forth. So the cyborg kind of creates this identity that allows Black desire to happen on Black terms, and to happen just as something that's allowed and something that is respectable, something that is not seen as, you know, against societal standards, and then also something that resists at the same time. So it plays very much into the politics of resistance, just as it creates a new standard of respectability for itself. So, of course, Janelle Monáe, she has this alter ego named Cindy Mayweather, who she often calls an android, but in a lot of her songs she calls this identity a cyborg. So I'm not sure whether she's doing this on purpose. I'm still trying to, you know, figure out where she's coming from because she knows the definitions of both, and she, you know, often talks about, she doesn't talk about them at the same time in her interview, but she talks about both in separate instances. But it's something that that she identifies as this person or this human-like, machine-like person that comes to Earth from not only another time but another planet in order to save people and kind of become a mediator between the haves and have-nots, between the rich and the poor in our present time. So she comes in as, you know, kind of this time traveler, this person from the future, as a mediator, but she happens to fall in love with a human being, and on her planet that is not acceptable, and so she has this droid control constantly following her and trying to kill her and disassemble her. And so a lot of her lyrics have to do with, and I'm sure a lot of you know Janelle Monáe already and, you know, are very familiar with this, but for those of you who aren't, a lot of her lyrics have to do with kind of running away from the droid control and finding love in, or searching for the person that she was separated from, who was Anthony Greendown. So a lot of these lyrics, luckily I found lyric videos on these. Not everybody has lyric videos like these Satisfactions have them, but you'll hear, you know, a lot of her trying to find this person, Anthony Greendown, again after she's been chased all over the place.
Of his heart, the lock of gray
ability to time travel, the ability to be this kind of machinic mediator, but also have the ability to fall in love with a human being, which most androids from her planet are not known for doing, which is why I'm thinking she may not be kind of a the traditional sense of a robot, or what a lot of post-human theorists think of as somebody who is a preset of patterns, but somebody who actually has the ability to desire and to love, which to me more so identifies with a cyborg than an android. And then here's another. Okay, now I can't open that one. Hold on 1 second. All right, here we go. Here's another version of
I hear the drizzle of the rain.
kind of her talking to her maker, who is, could be. We can, make parallels between a maker and a god, or, the universe, or whatever higher being, or, divine power that we believe made us. But for her, it is, for this particular narrative, it's whoever assembled her. So she's talking to this person and asking, why, did you assemble me to be able to love somebody, because it hurts that bad, right? Which also seems more cyborgian than...
It's falling from my window, and in the corners of my mind, I hope that I'll get to see you again. La da 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 da, my friend. I hear the colors in the flowers. Just like a candle snuffed it down. You're here, you're there, and then you're gone. La da 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 da. Suffering, singing, saying all the hurt. Say I'm really lost, baby. We suffered a wearing so much hurt on this earth. But you love me, and I really did. I love you too. Perhaps what I mean to say is that it's amazing that your love was mine.
Okay. And then, of course, we have the cyborg as exemplary of human technology. So, of course, melanin as technology, the third eye as technology, and human labor as technology. So, I'm not sure if I'll have time to play Val Ink. She's the last one on here. But she is somebody who is not only known as a technological insurgent, so technological insurgency is just a complicated way of saying that there are historical samples that are brought onto a new track and innovated to make a completely new song out of either sound bites from some sort of historical speech, or some sort of kind of exemplary or kind of staple sounds of African American, maybe jazz or R&B or blues, that are sampled and looped into a new song, or any sort of thing, or maybe soundscapes from some sort of religious ceremony. But this is kind of what she is. So she's a technological insurgent, but she's also the person, Val Ink, she is the person who called Haitians kind of the technology themselves, so a wire between the spiritual world and the natural world, which kind of plays nicely into technological insurgency, I think. And then we also have Aziza and Young Paris. And the reason Young Paris is up here, yes, he's a man, but I feel like a lot of messianic messages that are used through men have very feminist qualities to them. So it's a message of wanting to save a community of people and nurture them into a future, so nurture them into a kind of new community that does not have to suffer kind of the atrocities of Earth as it is now, right? So I'll play a little bit of Aziza first. So Aziza is somebody who is kind of a, she is a wire between, you know, the spiritual world and the natural world. So this is called Black Magic Woman, and it's a commentary about Ghanaian religious politics. And so in the beginning of the video, she kind of kicks the butt of these two Christian missionaries who try to kind of kidnap, or they try to convert this woman who's walking along the road, but it seems very kidnappy and rapey at the same time. And so this woman is running away from these Christian missionaries, and she brings the Christian missionaries into this secluded part of, you know, this woodsy area, and then they meet Aziza, the Black Magic Woman. So let's play this.
Submit to me, tell me your evil deeds. Taste my kiss of death. I blow the dragon's breath on your face. I go.
So not only is she talking about, you know, ancient spiritual science and making a commentary about colonialism and the disruption of that kind of ancient spiritual science, but she's also using it through a medium of EDM, or, you know, electronic music, which a lot of, and this genre is often called Afro-electronica or Afro-house. So Young Paris uses it as well as Val Inc. or Val Janti. And it's kind of a way to kind of establish your place in the Black sci-fi canon, even if the lyrics are not necessarily the tropes of traditional sci-fi, which is again why I would like to call it Black sci-fi, because you know, ancient spiritual science is just as significant to me in this kind of Black sci-fi canon. And this is Young Paris, who also uses electronic music to kind of convey his point, and his point will be very clear. I won't even have to explain it from the lyrics. Raised partially in New York and partially in Congo, but talks a lot about, you know, obviously a lot of social commentary about what goes on in Congo and what goes on for Africans in the Americas, and for those who are recent immigrants to the United States, as well as to Europe. And so he's also using kind of this, not only this, this kind of sonic commentary by using, electronic marimba and using all these other electronic instruments. I know you guys saw the person playing marimba there, but it's actually all done on a DAW kind of setup. But he's also using his commentary to kind of justify what Kodwo Eshun calls futures industry, or what Lisa Yassette calls dystopic futures, which are kind of ways of describing these kind of damning and dooming notions of what the plight of Africanness and Afro-diasporic identity is. So what it means to be an Afro-pessimist, what it means to be pessimistic about your future, what it means to allow technology to kind of technology and modern industry to kind of downplay the identity of the African and the importance of African culture, the importance of cultural continuity, and the importance of calling out disruption. And so, and futures industry can take any shape from, what it means to predict what's going to happen to Black people globally because of the AIDS epidemic, because of teenage pregnancy, because of this, that, and the third, all these epidemics that people kind of use to describe Africans globally and not any other, community for some reason, or what it just means to suffer from kind of the residues of colonialism and of big industry, and what it means to just be an African of the world and kind of an alien of the world. And of course, this can be applied to a lot of communities of color around the world, and a lot of minority communities, working class communities. So this is kind of what the cyborg identity kind of exemplifies for Black feminists and Afrofuturism. So I guess I'll save the rest for later. Thanks.
Hi. Thanks, Layla. That was amazing. And I think we're going to have a few things to talk about. Hopefully, be exchanged. So I'm going to talk about something that is a side project that I'm doing, which is trying to develop a theory of timbre that it takes some things of my dissertation, but it's taking on a different direction. So what you're going to see here is just one of my first attempts at putting all of this together. So all of this is completely work in progress. So thanks to Maria and Roxana for giving me a chance to try it out with you. And so the point is that if you hear something that sounds a little shady, you need to roll it. So I think I'm going to talk about two things. I had three main issues to touch on, but I think the third one would be, we might run over time. So I'm going to talk first about this general idea of what I think an approach to timbre might be. And the second one is that I'll try to see how that plays out a little by looking at the examples of Fatima Al-Qadiri that I sent out, and some more if you didn't have a chance to see them. So the first part, I sent out that definition of timbre, just in case the non-musicians are not entirely familiar with the idea of timbre, what it is, and even for the musicians, because the agreements that we might have on what timbre is are very, very up for grabs, I would say, and I think there's one of the things that I will be arguing is that there's very specific reasons why timbre is so far as undetermined as we still experience it. So the most basic thing you'll hear about timbre is that it's one of the 4 parameters that we use to describe the characteristics of a particular sound, in addition to pitch, rhythm, and dynamic or volume. More specifically, physics, for example, would say that timbre, what timbre is the spectral content of a sound, and and especially its attack, the characteristics of the attack. So we can differentiate a piano from a flute because the piano has a certain shape at the beginning and a certain distribution of partials that is different from a guitar and so on. And but so this is a very scientist explanation of sound, and the problem with it is that we're not listening spectrally when we listen. We simply hear a door and we simply hear a piano. We do all of those things. We don't do the same processing that a computer might do. So a phenomenological response to this would be, yes, you know that is the content of timbre afterwards, but you're already familiar with what a sound, what a door sounds like, or what something else sounds like. Even if it's a new sound, you have already an experience and a way of mapping it into very specific things. And so that's that aspect of phenomenology I'll go into a little bit more, because that's, I think, where one of the keys is. Two other definitions would say, for example, that timbre is the dimension that is different into musical sounds that are the same in both pitch and loudness. So if we hear a sound played in this and played over there, we know, and they last exactly the same and they're the same dynamic, we know what distinguishes them is timbre. So I'm really interested in that, because it's a very weird definition, but what it says is that timbre names difference as such, right? Timbre is simply what makes something be something else. And that something else, I want to take it very strongly. So it's always something else. It's not even, I would say it's not even that this is this and that's the piano, but there's even more a something else in the piano, or something else that we can learn to listen in a way. So another, for example, something, a paraphrase of that definition that I sent out is that it's everything that remains after accounting for tone's pitch and dynamic level. So it's always something that remains, always something that's there. That you, even if you describe it scientifically or by appealing to this is just that, there's something in the background, there's something happening, making your experience of it of a particular type. And it tells us, my argument, a strong one, is that timbre tells us much more about a sound than its pitch, because not all sounds have pitch, not all sounds have a rhythm that means anything in all senses, but in every case, or the volume, but the timbre certainly does, and the more robust the definition of how timbre says those things, this will be more clear. So the theory that I'm trying to address is calling timbre that parameter that discloses the materiality of sound, which is something that everyone is trying to get their hands on, to say what the materiality of sound is. So my attempt here is to locate what that means. So the materiality is this always something else. And also it's a piano, but it's a specific piano in this room, played by so and so who has or has not some training in how to touch a keyboard and so on. And that takes up an incredible importance the more we explore it, I think. There's something else about timbre, is that we don't have a very well defined language. The scientist approach will want to make it all about partials and frequencies and things, but as I said, that's just not enough, and that's just not how we hear. What we hear is rather, that sound is, it's a little rough, it's raspy, it's a very smooth path, and things like that. And most often they relate to tact, right? But we also talk about a bright and a dull sound and things like that. So I'm very interested in this intersensual contagion, right? There's something, sound and timbre takes up on qualities, and that happens. You can make the same case for all things. Like when you see a surface, you can sometimes feel in your hands how it feels. Like, so there's this interesting contagion that phenomenology, some aspects of phenomenology are really interested in, and that we don't have very discrete perceptions of sensory experience, but rather they cross into each other and there's some sort of contagion between them. And that contagion is one of the things that makes timbre, for example, that makes what I call the scientist approach very limited to timbre. So you can only think of, if you can only address sound in terms of its frequency, in terms of its parameters, you lose or you have to add secondarily another means and then think the same way about light and start building those bridges, and that's just, phenomenology has ways of accounting for this intersensory experience in different ways, which are interesting for me. So all of this richness that I want, I use the phrase of the and also. A sound is this and also that. A sound is dull and also it's a little heavy and things like that. There's something else we can say about sound. So to theorize about it, it's always to identify something, but to identify that whatever you say about it, it's limited to another position and another perspective that you want to say. And that I think is a useful critical tool and a critical attitude. So that's in particular. The next step that I'm trying to do in my project is to say that this idea of what timbre is and how we reduce it to the scientist definition or the difference between two instruments and all of that has a history. Or it has been construed with respect to specific notions of what a good sound might be. And in something, a part of this that I won't go into it, I claim that what organizes all of this modes of understanding what timbre is primarily is the voice, for many reasons. The voice has a centrality, a certain interpretation of the voice has its centrality. One of the ways that with which you may be familiar with the centrality is just Ana Maria Ochoa's recent orality. She shows that timbre and what is a good voice and a bad voice has been including up to the 19th century across the Atlantic. All of these very European German ideas are very much defining who speaks and who doesn't, right? So it's, it opens us to a very political experience of timbre. We always understand that timbre has what we can hear and the experience that we have of timbre suffers this contagion or is characterized by this contagion, and that it is historically organized according to the schemes that are very much inescapably organized by, this is what I want to argue, organized by the voice. Then you can say very easily that listening, and especially listening to timbre, is political, right? And there's a micropolitics in how you listen and how you make judgments about why you listen. So what I try to explore here is how that micropolitics works in the ground a little. And so this micropolitics is, I think it's very well already has been explored a lot in affect theory, especially in, obviously always, especially with regards to sight, to the visual. So William Connelly has a good piece called Materialities of Experience, where he talks about surveillance and the ways that surveillance and discipline operate in media and operate in the pervasiveness of cameras and things like that. So he says, everywhere that we walk, to be seen is to be surveilled. You never appear just as simply someone who is seen by another one. You're always seen from different dimensions. You're always located as a particular someone who might be a threat in some cases, or who shouldn't be, go beyond the limits that are assigned to you, otherwise so other things will happen. So experience, situation, displacement, all of these things that we may take are just things of the body are in connection. They are, there's something that traverses them, just as there's some contagion between the senses. There's also some contagion between a structure, power structures, and especially in the way that he describes it, surveillance society, and there's others that organize how we talk and how we move and what we can say and what we cannot. So, and again, timbre is the one parameter in sound, I say, that I want to argue that we can map how these forces are in operation. And it's precisely that that we don't hear frequencies. It's that we hear things that are always charged with affect, right? And affect is, in this theory, affect is what wants to name this this continuity between a system and what is supposed to be an individual who's the result of how the system has and how these discipline procedures have produced it. So Connelly just has a slogan type phrase that he says, power is coded into perception. And timbre, I say, is where you read how this code works. So I try to develop modes of critical analysis that use this materialist understanding of timbre as its focus, the one that I just described. And so what follows, it's an elaboration of that through the music of Fatima Al-Qadiri, who I argue is enacting precisely such a type of analysis and critique through various uses and manipulations of timbre in her music. So I'm saying that she's already, in a sense, she's already doing the type of analysis that I want to say, that I want to do. And this is my way of reading and listening to her music. What she does simply, I say, taps into the affective dimensions of sampled and synthesized sounds, and locates their prominence in our oral and affective landscape for grounding their inseparability. That this sounds, and especially a series of particular sounds that are very noticeable ones, that she makes you notice them, and she makes you notice the affect that always accompanies them, and exposes this connection, this affective contagion that organizes it. So in general, she makes music about video games, about underground dance music, especially the UK dance culture, and Orientalism. So this is a quick look at her latest album. So I sent you an interview about her new album, which is coming next week. So I don't know anything about that record yet. So I'm going to talk about the as yet new album. So it's a take on Orientalism, on the Orientalism of a style that she calls Sinobrine. Maybe you're not very familiar with the UK underground dance culture. I'm trying to make my way around it still as well. But there's something that a philosopher and a theorist wants to call the UK hardcore continuum. This is an elaboration of Paul Gilroy's idea of the Black Atlantic. So there's some continuity of genres and styles that connects reggae and dub and R&B and hip hop and a few things across from the Caribbean to the States and to the UK, and creates this network of a shared aesthetic, sometimes shared, a continuum. He calls it simply a continuum. So grime is just one of the latest versions of this. Grime comes out of dubstep, that comes out of two-step, that comes out of jungle, of drum and bass, that comes out of jungle, that comes out of house or something. So there's just these mutations of genres. And Sinogrime is one of these genres that no one has given a name to it. No one had given a name to it except for this theorist who just made a compilation and posted it on YouTube and say, look, this is Sinogrime. These are specific songs from all of these grime musicians who have something oriental about them. So what is it about this oriental thing that makes this music? Why does it show up in record after record? He's also a producer, so he has very very big ears and his fingers dip into this culture, and he picks all of this. And she was doing the same. They didn't know each other, and she was attuned to this at the same time. She's like, oh my god, there's this thing going on. So this is, I'm going to show you some quotations, a description of what she says a sinogram is. So she said, can you read that? Is that too small? No? Right. So there's something very innocent about grime. I underlined, right? There's something very innocent about grime. It's got a childlike sound to it, but at the same time it's incredibly sinister. It sounds like the villain scenes in cartoons and video games. And at the same time, it's so painfully digital. And when I say painfully, I mean in a good way. It was such a major departure, like a compendium of all the things that appeal to me as in sonic form. So this very, very late form of underground music. I'll play you an example in a minute. She says some more about it. What's interesting about sinogram tracks is that they are individual tracks on people's records, not albums or mixes or narratives and compilations. You feel like this is her theory about how this comes out, right? All these dudes watched kung fu movies when they were young and inspired them to make music that contained these core elements. Wiseness, strength of mind in the face of a rival, the threat of physical powers and prowess, the embodiment of martial art. It's a very masculine subject, and it fits perfectly into the sparring nature of rap and grime. This one-upping the other, a sinister rivalry. That's what made it popular. That's what made it threatening. That's what it was beautiful and sublime. So she's completely fascinated by the masculinity of this thing, but at the same time she calls it childish and sinister. And so it has all of this affects traversing it that she explores. This is my what I just explained about the hardcore continuum. This quote is interesting to read for the language that Steve Goodman uses. So this is the cybernetic phase shift of the Black Atlantic. Western populations become effectively mobilized through wave after wave of mechanic dance music, from dub to disco, from house to techno, from hip-hop to jungle, from dancehall to garage to grime and forward. Armed with the contagious polyrhythmic matrix of the future rhythm machine, the sensual mathematics becomes a sonic weapon in a post-colonial war with Eurocentric culture over the vibrational body and its power to affect and to be affected. So this is Steve Goodman's kind of analysis of what's really powerful and post-colonial in grime music. But what I hear and what I see and what Al-Qadiri says and does about this genre is a very different thing. I want to underline that I think what she has a different take on it. Specifically noting how it's male-dominated, how it's very macho, how it's very specifically bounded to a place that may be problematic for this idea of just power effective, like sonic effectiveness that Goodman celebrates, right? So she simply says it's a male-dominated genre in electronic music. So I feel like trying to create a context for her music that means like she's making this album with like a concept album, trying to create this context for it differently is the antithesis of grime. So she's making an anti-grime record, but she calls it an homage and an interpretation, throwing light into the existence of the definition, which doesn't really exist. So she's really making a critical listening of what this genre is and how it operates by making another record, right? So he's repeating the record in a way to say what it is. So this is an example. This is Code 9 is a producer who happens to be the same person who wrote this other thing, Steve Goodman. So he's basically the most important writer in this genre. And this should play. So yeah, you can say it's all just the pentatonic scales, right? But the pentatonic scale is presumably the most worldwidely distributed scale ever. So what makes this Asian in a sense is the sounds that they use, right? Like the samples, the patches, and the synthesizers that they use. She says, I'll move into this logic later. She simply says there's something about those keywords, and we'll get to that makes them feel Asian in a sense. So but I wanna preface that with my theory of how this repetition of the record and of the genre works. So it's a little more theory before we work on. What I think is that she participates of the post-colonial war in a feminist way, right? But she locates the way that it's very masculine just to examine how it operates by looking at what their techniques are. Those techniques placed in timbre, and in a sense to check what this idea of simply sonic effect, sonic power and sonic vibration and power force that has in this theory that simply levels everything into a pure force of sheer vibration tries to do. So this is what I read and that she's doing is an exploration of sound and affect through a different concept than vibration, which I think she displaces. The way that I'm thinking about this, that I see she's doing, is something that is related to Lucy Garay, her theory of feminine imitation. She would say that a woman, the femininity that a woman performs, and especially a hysteric, and this is from a long reading of cases, but she wants to say that the femininity that the woman performs is not an ideal of femininity that she needs to identify with. Rather, it's an idea of femininity that's produced by patriarchy, that she needs to comply to, but while being different to it. So Lucy Irigaray makes a difference between between trying to take the place of this paradigm and locating it as a construction of someone else. So the idea being that femininity doesn't need to come to be woman, but rather show that everything is set up for her to try to be something that she can never be and she would never be. And this she locates as a power of resistance, right? To say, this is not an ideal for me, this is an ideal that something else has placed, and that holds patriarchy in place by locating what everyone needs to do in a specific way. So there's a difference between trying to be the ideal and imitating the ideal, so much so that it is revealed as an ideal and as a construction, and so that what you can be is somewhere else in a different way. And this is a process that never stops, right? It's always a performative, and it's always a making of a something that will never coincide with the presumed model. So I think that Al-Qadiri is doing a similar thing in this sense. She's not doing a grime record. She's not trying to play music like grime musicians do, and she's not playing like female artist music. She's playing a record that takes what the means of operation of the record, namely creating this idea of Asia through the timbre, and she does the same thing but with different results, right? Placing attention on what is it about these records that makes them effective in the way that they are effective, namely creating their idea of Asia for what it might be. What I think she uncovers furthermore is that music that has an idea, that has these sounds that may be appealing for them for video games for whatever reason, relocates it as a product of the military entertainment complex. So she talks about this and their strategy of reducing difference to temporally fixed preset stereotypes. So all of the record And I'll play it a little in a minute so you can see what I'm talking about. In all of the record, what she's trying to do, or what it ends up being, is the way that she expresses this is what we who've never been to Asia, or who've never been to China, think of China, especially when it is named Asia. We imagine this as being Asia. This is the music for this blank construction that we are given again and again as being Asia. So she's from Kuwait. She says, well, I'm Asian and no one will ever call me an Asian. But we find these names applied again and again and mobilized and especially precisely through timbre, through these instruments. And so all of this, it's already taken place. We hear it and we don't hear what exactly might be the instruments. We simply know it's Asian, or the other name is exotic, but she fixates in this Asianness of them. So she really situates this genre that at first is sinister into being very childlike, and she enjoys it, right? She says it's painfully digital and painful in a good way. Where's my link to her record? No, this is not. Oh, 'cause sorry. So she's not going all pentatonic about it. She her melodies are much more limited. It's not about about the pitches, but rather the sounds, the quality of them, the way that she's exploring them. I think, and that's very interesting. And so the same is for video game music. I'm gonna jump to this example because it's getting too long. But the other record that she has is music for this Desert Strike video game that doesn't have a soundtrack to it, and so she composes it. You can read what I meant to say about it, but we can jump. This is the video. What I want to use from this is the sounds that she uses in here. So that's a sample of a gun, but you can hear the voice patch, right? Are very timbrally incredibly limited. She uses 3 patches out of this one synthesizer. I would say she says she uses Logic, so she probably has the patch. The Korg issued a program that has the exact same patches that the keyboard used to have, and I think she just uses 3 of them in all of her records, and that to me is incredibly interesting, and this is why I think that her emphasis and how she works about it is so revealing. This is what she says about it. The one reference to it that I have been able to find so far. Korg 1, which is a synthesizer favorite. A lot of people that make Sino music, it's full of Chinese flutes, Japanese flutes, right? There's the Asian patches, and they're called like that, like the Asian expansion pack and so on. Mm-hmm. There is a want, she says, a demand for Asian motifs in music, but martial arts and architecture are the largest sources of exposed image in China. So she's exploring this aspect of it, right? Like the timbral. Oh, here's my link. Okay, wait. This has the voices as well. So what follows, I'm just going to go. So it's really three things. She has like a sawtooth base, she has the pad, and all of the clingy thingies. So I want to show you this amazing website. It's one of the most incredible things I've found on the web so far. It's hosted by Bobby Blues, and Bobby Blues is this bear. And so the bear teaches you about synthesizers and how they work. It's amazing, and it's in Comic Sans. Red and yellow, it's amazing. So Bobby Blues says that the Corgan one was released in 1988. Its technology is the AI for advanced integrated synthesis based on sample acoustic waveforms called multisounds instead of common oscillators. There is a total of 100 multisounds that only occupy 4 megabytes, can you believe it? Available in the ROM and the read-only memory. Gathering samples from standard and exotic essentialization, right? So you have it there. It's essentialization. It's amazing. As she says, you cannot make this shit up. Essentialization, acoustic instruments, as well as samples from classic synths of the past. Corgan One was also the first widely known music workstation. Corgan One is the best synth, and this is true. And this is one of the reasons I think also it's so interesting to do this research into timbre into something that is the product of a commercial gadget. Basically, when it appeared, it was the most affordable synthesizer at the time. In 1988, it was like half or less than half the price than any synthesizer you could you could buy. And you can do everything you wanted to do in a stereo with just that thing, so that's why they call it the workstation, right? And so it completely transforms the music industry and produces this space for, let's say amateur, but simply bedroom making music from the beginning. So, and everyone that you can talk to knows exactly what the Korg is and what it works. So because it's a workshop, I thought I'd go a little into how synthesis works. Should I do this?
Yeah.
So we got a little lost last week for those who were here into what is digital and what is analog and so on. So can go very different ways, but specifically the way it's used here is that analog are two techniques of synthesis: additive and subtractive synthesis. Additive synthesis takes sine waves and combines them to create richer harmonic patterns. So a sine wave is, or like very different types of sines. Bobby tells us types of waves, right? So they're just combined, and so it's adding more and more very basic sounds to create richer ones. Subtractive synthesis works the opposite way. You start from a very rich signal, essentially noise, and you filter it down to create more defined sounds. And so those two have different oral qualities, and they come to be associated with different things. So the bass that Al-Qadiri uses all the time is a form of analog synthesis. It's basically a square wave bass, very amplified and very full of reverb. The other form of synthesis is digital sampling. That is just to record the sound of what you want to use and play it back. And so those two have different affordances, you might say, and especially in 1998 when all your keyboard had was 4 megabytes, sample space is very, very limited. So that was the first one that had pre-recorded sounds, the Korg M1. But these were they had to be so short and so little, but you also had to be able to manipulate them in a way that would be musical. So it's a form of hybrid synthesis that combines it combines the recording in PCM synthesis with sound with digital. I mean, with a digital reproduction of sound waves that operate in the way that analog music normally operates. So you can hear that, especially in this example I have for you. If I hold on to the key, you hear a sine wave, but you also hear the recording of the piano key, right? I hope this is loud enough. Like, all that you hear now is a sine wave. So the sound already contains the two, the attack of the piano, so that you know that it's a piano. So it kind of sounds like a piano. But it also has this thing that loops, and so you can manipulate that wave in a particular way. And this is just a basic patch. So now that we're here, I'm going to show you. This is one of the patches that are used in that Sinotrack. It was used all the time, and this is the good and the bad, right? It's a sampled pan flute with an octave switch at the beginning, and then it lowers it a little, so you can hear it. And so all of this is the only thing I can show you without the effects. Okay, that'll take too long for this one. But all of the processing, the octave and the drop afterwards is digital, and a manipulation of the wave. And the only thing that is in the sound specifically is this pan flute, right? The sampler had, this is just so you know this sounds. Right? If I had better skills, I would play it a little more complicated, but it goes no more than that, right? Just house licks that are everywhere, and Madonna, Vogue, and all of that. This piano is just about everywhere, and that's why it's interesting, right? It has this, it's contagious as well, and you know it before you know what it is, and all of these things. This is another Asian sound.
What is it labeled as?
This is called Koto Tremolo. But so the one that I'm really interested in is are the voices, right? Right, or the example that I sent. Right? She had a delay and a few things, but this is essentially what she's using. And these sounds for me are incredibly interesting and in a sense cyborg. So I guess I should have made this clear before. This contagion and way that we are effectively integrated with the consumer electronic industry, with the the military entertainment industry, all of those things. This is what I understand as being cyborgs, right? There's an effective contiguity that we cannot perceive without perceiving the things that are part of the sounds and all of this. And so there's this thing that mostly, for me, manifests as anxiety when I hear this. Right? And I think she's mobilizing that in very different ways. So I have here a way of showing you how this voice sound is produced. If you're interested in that, this is without all the reverb. It sounds a little like this. So you can hear that it's looping, and you can hear the attack of it, and then the loop, and then how it repeats, right? So it's a very simple form of sampling. This patch in particular has a single voice that sounds like this. It's basically a sine wave. And then it has another more complex sample. That sounds like that. So they combine it and they put a little reverb on it, and you have like this nice patchy things. There's something about these sounds that there's a recording in it that I find very again, very obscure and very uncanny. There's the voice of someone in this patch that is completely disappear from any record whatsoever. You don't know who makes this, you don't know when it was made, and it's sampled and sampled again. So most of the music don't even use the keyboard, but they use a recording of it that they mobilize it, and it's still in a sense the same person or the same choir that recorded in the first way. So it's this cyborg sound that has no presence, of has no anything else but an affect of non-presence to ourselves that we want to place in a voice, right? We want to think that a voice is so unique to ourselves that we speak with this one voice that is ours, but someone's voice ended up in my $20 iPad app that plays back the sound, right? So it's really interesting how you can just hear it, and internet forums are full of people. What's that sound? What's that choir sound? You know which one? And everyone says, yeah, I know, it's the cork one. And oh, here's the sample. Okay, thanks, that's amazing. This is it works like that. It just reproduces it, and you want to say it. It's like a virus. It just goes away, and everyone knows this patch, and everyone gets the same anxiety when you listen to it. It's just horrible. So that's. I think we should drop it there. I was going to say more about how the voice is synthesized and so on, and then about its politics. But I think we can drop there.
Thanks.
So I really enjoyed your presentation. I wanted you to say more about these timbres that we were hearing and how affect theory works in relation to these timbres and what we're so for those of us who maybe do hear only Madonna and we don't hear like these kind of these sino themes in the timbres and what would be associated with Asiatic timbres and these these only 3 patches that she uses. What's wrong with us when we hear that? I mean, and is that her analysis, or is it her I guess making commentary on that, or is it just kind of a very objective analysis? And I know you mentioned the word mobilizing. I was wondering what is mobilizing about it, and if you could just say a little more. And is there any kind of political subversion that's in what she's using? So sorry, too many questions, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, now, yeah. Yeah, we hear different things, but we know what it is, right? Like we have, like it's Madonna, and then you go, oh, and it's also just not Madonna. Madonna just took it for like years of house music that uses the sample, and I try to learn the actual Madonna riff, and it's too difficult. It's a commentary on a genre and the way that the genre is constructed, and I think the political aspect of it is that she's locating the idea behind the Black Atlantic and behind this thing of a hardcore UK continuum, who again is the guy who's like putting out her records. Like I'm saying a mad thing by saying that he's arguing against the guy who's putting out her records. So there's a little weird dialectic going on here, in that she's doing something about what that goes against what he's saying, in that this music doesn't represent any collective identity. What he's trying to say is this: there's something about, and also full disclosure, this guy isn't African in any sense. Like he's just a white UK guy. But he wants to mobilize this. He wants to say, no, there's this continuity. He's friends with Cojoation. They work at the CCRA, at the Center of Cultural Research and Analysis or something in the University of East London, where a lot of this theory is happening. And she's in New York. She's she's traveled very different routes to get there, and she's listening to all of these things through YouTube and like picking stuff up and like kind of being friends. So she's outside of this community and making a commentary on it and saying there's an idea of globalized belonging that I'm not part of because I'm a woman, because I'm Middle Asian, Middle Eastern, and not Asian or not African or not things like I don't have any common belonging to these things, and I love this music, and I feel painful delight about it, and I want to communicate and be part of it. So there's a political commentary in saying this idea of community is not inclusive, and the ways that it is empowering for those who make it, because it's an underground music genre that has a community very much in the cracks of the UK system, right? And she says this is very empowering, but it's also very it has a very, very specific limits of which I am not one. So all I do to participate of this is to make an image and to look at YouTube videos. So there's this, and she's locating that distance as I have to look from outside, and I have to feel my role as part of this by not being part of it, I think.
Okay.
Even though she's putting out records on the same label with the best of them, right? So it's, yeah. There's also what I think she shares a lot with the music that you have is the idea of future, right? Another record that she has is like music, like sci-fi music, like genre-specific experiences, and she's like there's soundtracks for life in perfect capitalism. So she's kind of making again, it reflects the image of futurism in general, not just Afrofuturism, by saying, okay, if the future is this would be the soundtrack to it. So it's a nice dialogue and in a good commentary. And I would ask the same question about the power to mobilize in commercial music, in this sense. Like one of the things about Al-Qadir is that she's indie in a way that is very specific. She's very well known, I think, in being interviewed by Guardian, but she makes her records in her bedroom. Like she's all by herself, but somehow outside. How does it work when you're more inside of the culture industry? To call it that.
Yeah, I think it works in moments and not in actual. Not working within, which is why I guess I talk about people working within the canon, but also having issues with working within the canon, because the canon is so loose and it's so vague. And for these mainstream artists, what I like about them is that they create continuity with the underground artists that I really dig and enjoy and love, seeing and being able to talk to after shows and things like that. With people like Erykah Badu and Janelle Monáe, I can't necessarily do that. And what I like about them, especially people like Erykah Badu, is that she creates kind of these moments of Afrofuturist or Black sci-fi mobilizing. So for her, it's and it could be her working with her Mac in her bedroom, but it's also a moment of showing kind of her recognition of people who do that by making these very, I don't know if they're simple songs, but they're they're things using kind of older technologies, maybe using a Corrigan one or using some sort of synthesizer that's not necessarily all bundled up into like a digital audio workstation. With all these different these add-ons to it, so it's her showing her appreciation for underground music, her showing her appreciation for electronic music, and her doing it on her own and producing it on her own, and showing people that this is my appreciation for maybe the EDM scene in New York or in the UK. Or showing people, this is my appreciation for where I came from as a 5%er. So Erykah Badu used to be a 5%, and I'm so sorry I didn't play any Erykah Badu. I'm like talking about her to an extent, but I didn't play any. Hopefully you guys heard one of the music samples that we posted. But she used to be a 5%er and used to practice supreme mathematics. And you can hear it a lot in her first album. in some of the songs, but she has like these moments where she talks about supreme mathematics, and she talks about Egyptology and ancient command and ancient ways of practicing holistic medicine, and ancient ways of just channeling spirit, and those are her kind of ways of paying homage to something that's grounded, even though maybe it's not grounded materially, but it's grounded in terms of this African materiality, this way of saying, spirit is very natural for us, and the third eye politics are very natural for us. But at the same time, I am an artist that experiences all these things in terms of mainstream music and all the antics of the music industry that try to change my image, change my look, and categorize me. And so even though I'm not, yes, I am, a mainstream musician, and yes, I'm popular, and blah, 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 I'm still gonna slip in, I was born underwater with $3 and 6 dimes, I'm still gonna slip in those supreme mathematics. I'm still gonna slip in, these little kind of, what's the word that I'm looking for? Just these, I guess, euphemisms, or these ways of, saying things without really saying them. These kind of esoteric ways of making lyrics that not everybody has to understand, but the people that were grounded with her in her beginning days of spiritually knowing herself can understand. So I think that's her kind of way of resisting how she's being categorized as a mainstream artist. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it's amazing, and I don't. It's not that I approach Fatima as being like authentic because she's indie. Like I have no idea of what she's like a person. Like the only thing I read is an interview and listen to records. Like I have the same distance to it, but it's just how to navigate. The other question that I had is that one of the things that she's exploring is this idea of Asia, right?
Mm.
How do you think that construction that is so pervasive of Asia as this one homogeneous unity of something that is not homogeneous at all?
Mm-hmm.
What's the relation between Asia and Africa? When Africa could be described precisely in the same terms. Like Africa is as diverse, as complex, as broken and separate as everything else. So why the idea of Africa as a unity appears, and what does it do that Asia doesn't, for example?
Yeah, one of the interesting things that I love about all of these artists is that they kind of are, a lot of people describe them as like self-essentializers, which is, it's like, yeah, and nah, yes, young Paris is, very explicitly, calling himself an African, and he calls black people in the United States Africans as well, and that tends to be kind of the language with a lot of these spiritual technoculturalists, the people who are talking about themselves as channelers and wires between the spiritual world and the natural world. And so young Paris, as well, and you've heard the rhetoric about Fela, often being called somebody who self-essentializes, who thinks of Africans as people who are not supposed to wear European clothing, and for him European clothing just means a shirt and pants. And he's like, no, the African is not supposed to wear shirt and pants. They're supposed to be, partially naked. They're supposed to be wearing furs. They're supposed to be, they're supposed to have certain paraphernalia in their hand that kind of resemble staff, scepter, sphere, whatever it is. Something that, that maintains this sense of what it means to be African, through an essentialist perspective, but at the same time, it's like, yes, that could be political subversion, that could be inverting the idea of, or this image of what it means to be African in a very caricaturist way, and saying, what you see as dark, I'm going to see as light, and I'm just going to use that and take advantage of it. But at the same time, with the artists that I showed now in the contemporary moment, I feel like it has more to do with them being spiritually grounded or ancestrally grounded in something that has been taken away from them for so many years. So all of these things that have been separated into these notions of, whether it be black magic or this negative way of dancing, this negative way of expressing yourself, this way of wearing your hair naturally that's deemed not respectable for the workplace, or not being able to wear locks in the military, or not being able to be black and non-Christian in this country, not being able to, whatever it is, or having to practice, this thing that's called proper English, but it's really standard English and newscaster English, and not being able to practice AAVE. All these things have been, have created these separate categories of what's thought of as, too resistant and too militant and too barbaric and just too, just something that is too dangerous to, this new world way of doing things. And so this kind of quote-unquote self-essentializing is really just a way of saying, no, all of these things, we're African to begin with, and we don't need any sort of societal standards to define what it means to us to be, here in this country, and what it means for us to be successful, what it means for us to be respectable. We define those ways of being respectable and being heard, and of resisting, and we are able to do this, through, whatever kind of modes of resistance that we want to create. And if it ends up sounding self-essentializing, maybe it's meant to be that way just because it is something that is decolonial, something that represents this non-Western way of doing things very purposefully. And so in some respects it is self-essentializing, but it's a very necessary self-essentializing, if that makes any sense. And so it creates kind of this monolith of Africa only as a way of saying, well, if you're going to say Africa as a whole is bad, we are going to take Africa as a whole and talk about it in a positive light, even if we have to talk about it as a whole. And then we'll talk about the nuances. And we can talk about both at the same time.
Yeah, and there's something about that logic that is very similar to what I think Layla is doing.
Yeah, definitely.
You take the stereotype and you participate of it and you make it as real so that you show it to be a stereotype and in no way coextensive with yourself, right?
Exactly.
So she wants to have a difference from it. And she's been accused of being essentialist as well, all the time. And so, I mean, that this just makes it into another question, like what is feminine about black sci-fi or what, because Layla is just a French white second wave feminist philosopher, So all of this intersectionalities start to be really interesting in the way that you play with a stereotype and what it means and what it does.
Right, exactly, and which is why I asked you, is she doing something that's politically subversive? Because I totally hear that, the fact that this is a stereotype and she's using these three patches not just as, commentary of how other people hear it, but as something. But it also represents her music. It's not like she's creating a parody album or something like that.
Exactly.
Or anything. It's something that is very tangibly her and very tangibly her ideal of what she means to portray as Asianness, as a form of resistance in a lot of ways. And I find that really powerful about her music.
The last thing that I caught my attention from the last two examples that you played, not the last, the first two.
Oh, the satisfaction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Sorry. The satisfaction, the beat. My first question was gonna be about the beat, but okay. No, the last examples that the Janelle Monáe examples. This
Oh,
other
okay.
ones.
Yeah.
It sounds like ballads, like British ballads, right? Like the genre is so mind twisting in that sense.
Yeah.
Right? Like and maybe she's doing a similar operation. Like I'm gonna tell you a story in the way that you know how to listen to stories.
Exactly. Yeah.
Something like that.
I mean that's exactly what it is. So yeah, and she's very influenced by a lot of European composition and a lot of both in the visual and musical world, but especially the visual art world and cinematic world, German expressionism. But she, I completely agree because when I first hear her music, or when I first heard her music, actually 10 years ago now. Wow, in 2006. That was my first impression, was like, whoa, it sounds great, but it sounds so white. And not that whiteness is not greatness, but it's like that's been our definition of greatness for so long, but she's just there's something revolutionary that she's doing here that's outside of whiteness, and I'm just like, why is it so revolutionary and white at the same time? What's going on? And it's just like, and I think that's exactly what it is. It's just giving us kind of this kind of twisted, demented sense of what it means to be, what it means to experience kind of oppression, as a human being in our modern capitalist world, but also it definitely plays on the early 1920s sci-fi flick Metropolis. So obviously Cindy Mayweather is kind of almost a direct character out of that movie. So it's very German expressionist in that sense as well. And so I think her music has to kind of tie into this kind of fairy tale that she's telling through that, this very sick, demented fairy tale. But it's also kind of taking that, it's kind of very exemplary Afrofuturist in the way that Mark Derry first defined it, is taking those tropes of sci-fi, or what we think of as traditionally Western sci-fi, and applying it to a subject that we don't think of at all as very traditionally sci-fi, and so all around just twisted and demented. But it works.
Questions?
Yeah, that seems like a great note to open up to the floor.
I'm just interested to get your read on why there's so few patches are used, and what her name is?
Al-Qadiri.
Al-Qadiri.
Yeah.
I think that's of interest to our group because our means are also strictly limited, right? We that's by choice. We by choice, but this is also by choice, right? And this is also to an historical time period. We're talking like, especially since your interest is through Laurie Anderson, for example, that it has those kind of historical overlays. And with Al-Qadiri, like this is she? So I know you're saying that she likes especially these '90s sounds. Is that am I reading this correct? Or like this, like that the core that you're talking about is from the '90s.
Yeah.
Right. Is there a particular reason why she's limiting herself to that?
Well, the reason I don't know. What I think she's doing, like what comes through for me is that she foregrounds it as a specific timbre. Like what brings about what brings the focus into is this is about timbre. Like what gathers everything is about timbre, and not just this is the sound of the chord, but what it does and what it mobilizes and how it's being the center of one music culture after the other. So it becomes this master signifier of a few things that just by locating it timbrally, she doesn't need to say anything else than play those sounds and everything just goes there, right? So it's a very specific magnetic node of references and critiques that she that she very specifically found herself in control in. So by making the record super stark timbrically, she foregrounds that because we don't listen to timbre. basically, right? Like she says, well, this whole record is going to have 3 patches, and you're going to listen to them until you understand what it is about. Kind of. No.
I have a question for Layla, but Danny, you may have something to add on at some point. So I was thinking about the article that you gave us to check out, and I think that you have a specific intervention that you've written on before, so I want to ask you about that. But thinking about timbre as being this sort of bizarre tool that, like, on the one hand, you know, we read, like, Ochoa says that, you know, that sort of timbre, which is often defined by the voice, is like what can constitute political agency. So, you know, it gives you voice, it gives you political subjectivity, you know, like this is, you know, and timbre is, as Daniel said, we didn't quite get to talk too much about it, but is sort of defined in terms, or defined by the voice. So I'm wondering, you know, if voice or timbre more generally, if timbre is something that can both constitute political agency, but it also is one of these parameters that we define difference with, or how we define difference. I was wondering how that might sort of impact, you know, the use of this technology. So for example, in the further considerations of Afrofuturism, we get this claim that, you know, in the 1980s, all these digital technologies come, you know, synthesizers and sequencers, and they sort of change the character of the voice, change the timbre of the voice. And is it Ashun?
Yeah, sure.
Makes the argument that, okay, well now, you know, listeners can no longer assume, you know, musicians are sort of racially identified by their voices.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, you know, is that something that you sort of like get behind? Do you have tweaks to that, you know?
I get behind it, and I also have tweaks to it at the same time. I get behind it because it is kind of the first time, well, I don't know if it's the first time that we're not defined racially by our voices, because obviously in, you know, the Roaring 20s, you have a lot of black, you know, jazz vocalists who are the hidden voices behind a lot of white actresses in cinema. And so, and it's because of the timbre that they're specifically sought out, because of this kind of imagined sense of what it means to have, you know, a black vocal timbre that's, you know, somehow evokes some sort of operatic richness that doesn't exist elsewhere, which is like, I don't know, for me is like complete bullshit, but you know, and there's articles on that as well, as about people actually very specifically seeking out black women vocalists, especially those who jazz vocalists and also opera singers who can evoke something that other opera singers and jazz singers can't. And so there was that imagined sense of you know, racial designation that kind of said, okay, black vocalists can do that, but at the same time, you know, we can mask their vocals so that, and pretend that they're white vocalists, because we imagine that this is what, you know, the right vocals sound like, and the right timbre sounds like. So there's that I, you know, there's that way I can get behind it and I can't. But at the same time, yes, in the in the late 70s and early 80s, mid 80s, as Ashun says, it is kind of the first time that we're not hearing a racial divide in terms of timbre, but some sort of, there is obviously a divide between, you know, actual vocal frequencies from the human body and synthetic frequencies from, you know, something like a vocoder or something that kind of divides, you know, speech frequencies and synthesizes it into what the machine renders, you know, a human-like sound, but not an actual human sound, just kind of a duplication or an imitation of what the human sounds like. But at the same time, it creates, you know, what we think of, cinematically and, in all of our cinematic imaginaries as the voice of the alien. And the voice of the alien ends up becoming the voice of the minority. It ends up being the ultimate minority, metaphorically. And so we are at the same time hearing race, timbrely. Was it Timberly? Timberly. And so I get behind the fact that Black people are creating for themselves kind of a space in electronic music for the first time, where everybody's kind of on the same playing field. But I don't think it should be masked that the voice of the alien can be metaphorically, can metaphorically connote the voice of the minority and should be some sort of social commentary, should be read into, especially at that time. And yeah, I guess that was my stupid way of saying yes and no. I'll think about it more.
I was very surprised by that phrase. I wouldn't get behind it. I don't think that music, like neither the 80s nor the 90s
Not
nor
even the
now,
80s.
not even the 80s, nothing. One of the pieces that I was gonna talk about if we had time is someone called Nina Eitheim. She's influenced a lot of what the approaches that I take here, and she's been doing a really interesting research on racial profiling through voice, basically, and especially as it operates through training for singers. So she's done ethnographic research and all sorts of things, and how do you asking singing professors and vocal coaches and things like that, how do you train for someone to sound like this? What does it mean to sound like that? What does it mean to sound like this or that race? And it's a very elaborate analysis of this, and she locates precisely in this aspect. She says there's a micropolitics of listening. Every time you listen and you think you hear race, you're not hearing the person's race, you're hearing the way that person has been entrained to sound in this specific way, and that entrainment makes it impossible for them to escape it. So it's a shaping of the body, and so this is the other aspect by which I want to argue that timbre is historically and materially created in the body, is by saying all of these techniques determine it as teaching and not teaching, like policing and everything else, makes you sound like a specific type of person, right? Like very located. It has to do, it's the dimensions that she uncovers out of commentary from the trainings is just fascinating. And the other article she has is about a software of voice synthesis as well, that I didn't talk about that mode before, but it uses it's like how Siri works on your phone, is that there's little snippets of basically combinations of sounds and vowels, so a full map of all of the possible sounds, and the software you type your melody like in Finale, and then the software uses that patch, it's not a patch but a combination to reproduce a singing voice. So, and obviously the first thing, I think the software is Japanese maybe, and the first software that came out is the Soul singing voice, right? So this is you can use the whatever her name is, and she's Soul, and the other one was a British singer. So the British singer it has the name of the person who recorded that voice. So it's like Barbara something. It's a famous person. I don't know who she is. The Soul voice is anonymous. It's just the Soul black voice. And the software, the first time it was released, it was a fluke because people started complaining. She's like, she doesn't sound like Soul. She has an accent. The person who recorded this was Hispanic Caribbean. Like she was of some African constitution and descendancy. The programmers, Japanese or not, thought that this would do because it's so and so it's a fluke. And the way that she analyzes this is just fascinating. that even in synthesis, even with all of these processes presumably made so anonymous, you can locate the voice of what it is. So it's this again. It's this very uncanny location and dislocation of your voice. Saying my voice is what identifies me as what I am, but it is not the product of what I would like it to be, and things like that, and I cannot escape it. I cannot sound like something else, even if I wanted. So when we listen to Laurie Anderson play with a vocoder, we know it's her. Like, we're not gonna fool anyone if we try to do the same like the voice of the master. It just doesn't work, right? So this voice is so we can try, but it's going to be at distance, like trying to locate that dynamic precisely, and not simply replicate that overlays. Right.
Yeah, and there's totally that aspect of it too, which is, definitely speaks to the dangers of the African monolith or the Asian monolith. Just because, if somebody is, an African descendant, but does not have, the same sort of timbral, whatever constituency of somebody who is, African American from the United States, but still gets, placed into that monolith because of some sort of reason for making a very blanketed music production voice or something that has nothing to do with the person or their cultural background or this or that. It's just very, or their geopolitical, geocultural specificity is, it's very dangerous. But of course it's definitely a real thing that, these voices can be located very specifically. These synthetic voices can be located very specifically in that sense, definitely. And so, yeah, that's totally another aspect of it, and it's very real, and it's, it has its, and that's why things need to be both nuanced, but also, the essentializing of voice and timbre needs to be talked about. Well, I don't even know that there needs to be an essentializing of timbre. I think there needs to be, oftentimes we can locate timbre in a very healthy way, and essentializing something like timbre is very different from essentializing something like spirituality, which has been dismantled very purposefully, whereas timbre, I don't think, experiences the same sort of hegemonic disruptions and attack as something that isn't quite as very specifically physical as timbre or something like that, or the quality of the voice. But yeah, I agree that timbre in that sense can definitely be located.
I'd like to ask a very broad question, which actually follows up on a lot of this discussion. Because going back to that Ishun quote where he's talking about the 1980 synthesizers, I similarly think that you can't take the race right out of a voice. However, what Ishun says that out of that you get heteronomy, or heteronomy. So I'm curious as to, what is the affect of heteronomy? Like this aspect that we can now kind of manipulate, right, our voices, and the fact that, Daniel, you pointed out how to you that patch with Fatima raised anxiety, but it can be used in a number of different ways, right? So what is that relationship between that multiplicity, right, that has been added to the voice, that has been amplified to the voice, and its affective potential or affective materiality?
Well, with respect to the patch, the first thing that I, and I totally forgot to say this, but it has no gender, it has no race. Like, this is a completely disembodied, ideal, clean and perfect voice, and that is one of the locuses of anxiety for me. Like this is the voice of no one, and it's supposed to stand in for everything. This is the ideal of everyone. The blank idea of capitalism, of everyone coming together and everyone being the same as everyone, like bad democracy, capitalist, liberal understanding of we have to break our differences and come all together as one, sounds like that. And this is the timbre of it. There's a quote that I showed Maria that I found when I was preparing from Pierre Boulez, where he says that this must be around the 80s as well. But he says, we still haven't, with synthesizers we have to craft every sound, and these sounds they're just because they're like a weird combination of nature and techniques, they're a hybrid and they're asexual. Like this idea of the hybrid asexual synthesizer, I just found it so funny.
It's asexual, he says, because it cannot reproduce.
Yeah,
That's
it cannot
the
reproduce.
main,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. So it's great, and those voices are precisely asexual, and that they cannot reproduce and that they cannot do anything, and that's one of those centers that of anxiety and problems. But what it's interesting about it, in the same way of like taking upon and like appropriating the stereotype and deploying it and all of those things, that another way you can say hybrid asexuality is to say cyborg polymorph pleasure, and saying like all of these deployments are pleasurable as they are. But the painfully digital that Fatima says this is also the anxiety that it produces. It's also a place of enjoyment if you manipulate it. So whatever she's doing with the soundtrack, there's some enjoyment in doing it, even if it is sending out this virus of anxiety over the internet, right? There's the pleasure of taking apart and locating and displacing the sounds. And again, that happens through something that is shared and like this affect, and that sharing is not a good thing, right? Like what she's locating is the fact that this machine makes you feel this way when I play a nice melody in it is a problem. It says something about our idea of being subjects that is very disturbing for what we're presumed to understand as being subjects and as being in contact with others. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, it was just a very general question, because we do this right during our own sessions. Like we constantly manipulate our voices, etc. And so I was just curious about your reactions to the kind of multiplicity.
Can you repeat the whole question again? Sorry, I don't remember the original one.
It's a bit of a convoluted thing because I guess in the fact, for instance, with Erykah Badu and New America, where the fact that she can present herself as a little girl and as an older man, for instance, and we know that it's her, right? That it's all of her. But that aspect of being able to kind of multiply her voices and then take on these personas, what kind of affective possibilities does that do? Just because it seems like your discussion of timbre and affect and voice are linked here.
Not sure what the affect would be in terms of her her different aged alter egos. Yeah, I guess I don't really talk about alter egos and affect too much. So I don't really know what to say to that.
Yeah, I guess
I'm sure there's an answer, I just have to think of it.
No, I think problems with my question, but I'm just curious about how the voice, right, with the technology does offer a bit of manipulations and options, etc. But Layla, specifically with your example, so much of it is, the music video is so crucial, and then this aspect that the skin, even though you mentioned it can be a kind of technology, it can't necessarily be exchanged to the degree that Erykah Badu, kind of representing herself as a younger female or a man, can. So that kind of distinction between what the equipment offers and then what it still does not offer. So I guess I was just out of curiosity thinking about if we critique Oshun for saying, right, that you cannot take away the racialized timbre, what do we do with the fact that these voices or these options are multiplied nonetheless? So I'm curious about that.
True.
Because with the cyborg, right, we keep thinking about it, oh, it's plural, it's multiple, etc. But so what? What does that actually offer us?
Right.
That's my question.
Yeah, that's a good ass question. I don't really know the answer.
Sorry, it's convoluted.
No, it's warranted. What do we do with that? I don't know. Have to think about it. Sorry.
No, sorry to put you on the spot.
No,
I don't
okay.
have an answer.
I'm
Anyone else?
very
have
bad.
Yeah.
That's the question. I'm sorry. I'll think of something.
Well, I think it's. Oh, no, go ahead.
Layla, you were mentioning about the rhythm in one of the songs, and you said that you were interested in talking about it. I don't remember exactly what song was that.
First, the satisfaction.
Universal perspective. Yeah.
I would like to know.
I would like to know too what's going on with that rhythm because it's so fucking bizarre. It's just like, I don't know. It's just a weird ass rhythm. It's just it seems so like
It's offbeat.
it's just it's very
sliding.
Right.
And when I heard that beat, I was like, whoa, that is like radical, because they're going outside of any sort of traditional setup. And you, even if they were doing it digitally, it wasn't, because when you work with a DAW, it most of the time it will snap to a grid, your beat that you're like entering in. So they had to physically make the decision to make this very fluid, very like transgressive beat, and I was like, yes.
Yeah.
I love, that's like my
Click
kind of
off
beat.
that smart snap.
Yeah, totally.
Exactly. So that it was a very intentional, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it totally was. But at the same time, they also had a steady pulse underneath it to make sure that you knew that was what was happening.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like if you listen to it maybe 100 times in a row, and maybe it was faster, it would be, there would be some sort of steady rhythm that you could dance to, but like at the pace that, or at the tempo that it was at, and the fact that it was not, snapped to a traditional, rhythmic grid was, creates a kind of anxiety. So it was like.
I think one of the problems is that the synth doesn't match I think there's a pulse, I think there's a beat, and I think all of the drums fall simply on like not random but very specific upbeats, right? But I didn't hear it as it's very weird, it's very complex, and the thing that makes it very weird is the synth that's in it, that it's doing all of the subdivisions that don't match up to the general. So you have to kind of dissociate it, like, okay, the synth is doing something, and this is the bass, and all of these things are like just accents just falling, and they're quite like I did hear some cycle to it, but it's this thing that you have to be listening like completely dissociatively.
Exactly.
You can bob your head to it, right? It was there. You can actually bob your head to it, but then you're like, why did the what am I looking for? It's not the kick.
The snare. Should we play
what
it?
Should be like a snake, like what should be the backbeat, basically.
Right.
Kind of like voice is like
and I think,
out.
and so that's a very interesting thing. For example, that's how a lot of you want to say African-derived music, like much of like Latin American music works by not having any instrument fall on the pulse. No one is actually clapping the pulse. Everything is just going offbeat in different ways, and I don't know, but that's what makes me want to dance, right? Like that's what propels you to kind of fill in that space and like to be, okay, there should be a beat here, and you do it and you become part of it by moving. But the synth has nothing to do with it.
Right, exactly. Right. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's supposed to like emulate the kind of cogs and gears of a machine that you know, when you hear, you know, some sort of mechanical assemblage of a machine that's, you know, very audible, you can hear it, you can, and if you listen to it long enough, you try to create a rhythm out of it, but then it kind of falls out of rhythm, but then it, you know, but there's still something consistent about it that you want to follow, and maybe that's what, you know, this is supposed to be.
Literally tripping.
Right, exactly.